Chapter 4. The Radiated Earth, Hiroshi's First Crisis. Hiroshi stood still, stunned in place. The era of destruction did not come all at once but in stages. The first era of destruction destroyed the plants, and the second era would destroy the water sources. Hiroshi felt like a heavy stone was pressing against his chest. If that's the case, would there be a third era of destruction, a fourth? What would they destroy? After a long silence, the scenes of destruction ceased to worsen. Although the sun hanging in the sky was much dimmer, it still provided enough light to illuminate the world. Hiroshi had never felt such a sense of security from these rays of light. Even though they lacked high temperatures, they were sufficient. For humanity, true doomsday would only come if the earth plunged into darkness. He returned to the room and looked at Kiko. She was still sitting there, unaware, lost in her sweet dreams, emitting a blissful smile. Meanwhile, Benji was restless. Animals' instincts are often more acute than humans. It seemed to have sensed something, jumping around the room frantically, whimpering constantly, displaying both fear and anxiety. Thunk! Hiroshi opened the door, ready to check the situation outside. Benji dashed out right behind him. As soon as he stepped out, Hiroshi felt a bit uncomfortable. The cold wind hit him like knives. Fortunately, he was prepared, wearing the thick coat he had readied earlier, and headed straight for the livestock shed. There was a smell of decay in the air, like the mustiness of a house uninhabited for years. He looked up at the sky. The sun's color was eerily similar to the moon's, its radiance no longer scorching but subdued. A layer of cosmic dust blocked much of its light. "Oh my," Hiroshi muttered to himself. From this moment, the impact of the first era of destruction had changed the entire world. It not only destroyed the plants, but also shattered the biological chain that had persisted on the blue planet for millions of years. Livestock, insects, important links in the biological chain, would be forced to change their ways of life due to food shortages. Those adaptable would evolve, while the weak would perish. And this outcome was destined to affect all of humanity. The future world's landscape would undergo significant changes. Hiroshi stood still for a moment, contemplating, then resumed his stride. Nearly half of the cattle and sheep in the livestock shed were dead, the rest restless and agitated, constantly bellowing. Hiroshi wasn't surprised. Although the main focus of the first era of destruction was the indiscriminate devastation of plants, the drastic drop in temperature caused by the sun's destruction also led to the freezing deaths of some animals. This served as a warning to Hiroshi. He couldn't just heed the superficial words of the system prompt. He had to consider a series of possible consequences. At the same time, Hiroshi noticed that the door of the livestock shed had been violently knocked open from the inside. After checking, he found that the largest and strongest yellow ox in the shed was missing. But Hiroshi didn't have the energy to search for it now. Instead, he fell silent for a moment, then turned and walked towards the planting area. The lush green rice seedlings originally planted in the farm were now all pale gray. A series of data appeared before his eyes. Radiated rice, containing severe toxicity. Consumption has a 98% chance of causing pulmonary fibrosis and a 2% chance of disrupting the consumer's genome structure and reordering it. Radiated land, containing severe toxicity. Ordinary seeds cannot grow. Seeds of radiation-resistant grade or higher can be planted. Seeing these two rows of data, Hiroshi suddenly felt his heart sink. The most dreadful thing had indeed happened. This was permanent damage. From now on, the entire world's land would no longer be able to cultivate plants. This meant that people would only have access to the emergency grain stored by the country, hoarded grain. Once those grains were depleted, there would be no new supplies. A 2% chance of disrupting the genome structure. Isn't that terrifying? Hiroshi shifted his gaze back to the radiated rice seedlings. As an excellent farmer, he had also studied professional breeding and planting knowledge. Each organism and plant had a unique combination of genes within its body. Generally, these combinations were stable, but accidents could happen. Once the gene combination was affected, dreadful consequences would follow, such as growing 2 heads or 3 arms. It was what was commonly referred to as mutation. Like the Godzilla next door in Sakura Country, It had mutated from a common lizard into a monstrous creature capable of challenging the heavens due to long-term exposure to nuclear radiation. Its genetic lock had been broken, and its strength, size, and intelligence had greatly increased. However, this was the most ideal and perfect scenario, something impossible in real life. 99.999% of genetically mutated organisms, humans, would become deformed, paralyzed, with bones protruding from their bodies, or even devolve into monsters devoid of reason. Out of 1,000 examples of gene recombination, it was unlikely to produce a perfect recombinant like Godzilla. The vast majority of mutated creatures would die in extreme pain as their bodies collapsed. In simple terms, if people consumed these radiated plants, there was a 98% chance of painfully dying as humans, and a 2% chance of causing some chaos as monsters before dying in agony. These things are dangerous. They need to be destroyed. Hiroshi felt distressed. He had personally sown and irrigated these rice seedlings, tenderly cared for them, but now they were no longer food but poison. At that moment, Benji suddenly became alert and began barking frantically in one direction. A yellow ox, whose physique could rival that of an elephant, charged towards Hiroshi like a tank gone mad. Two white dragon-like gusts of air rushed out of its nostrils, and the earth seemed to tremble beneath its iron hooves. With each step, it sounded like the beat of a drum. Hiroshi could even see the bloodshot veins in its eyes. It was the same ox that had broken through the door of the livestock shed and fled earlier. But why was it so huge now? It had doubled in size, its fur bursting with muscles, blood flowing freely, yet it seemed oblivious to pain. It was bleeding profusely, and its life obviously couldn't sustain this state for long. Suddenly, Hiroshi thought of the mutation theory he had pondered earlier. This ox had undoubtedly consumed those radiated rice seedlings, causing its genes to be reshuffled. Now, it wasn't just an ordinary yellow ox. It was a yellow ox plus, or it could be called a cowzilla. Hiroshi didn't know if he had bad luck or too much luck. A 2% chance had managed to find him. Its strength and size had increased tremendously, but it had lost its sanity, becoming the purest killing machine. Hiroshi watched as the ox approached him, its pupils shrinking to the size of pinpricks. At that moment, Hiroshi was in danger.